All right, well, I'm ready. Is everybody else ready?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm not talking about goats. Although you may have seen anyone who follows Perl, the Perl commit repo on Twitter, it's at Perl 5.20. You may have noticed that our picture is a goat, and that is a goat that belongs to the abbey where Father Chrysostomos, one of our frequent committers, lives, and the goat's name is Perl. So this is not entirely off topic. This is not Perl. This is a strange mutant goat, sort of like Perl would be. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Perl 5.20. This year, Perl 5 is 20, which is kind of crazy. And I thought about talking about the historical whatevers of Perl, and then I decided that I wasn't going to say anything interesting, and I'm just going to talk about Perl 5.20 because it's pretty awesome. Perl is a pretty old language as far as languages that are still alive go. Perl version 1 came out in 1987. Which for me is crazy. In 1987, I was working in a different language on my TI-99. It was awesome. And I finally got over that, although I kind of want to get back to writing BASIC for I don't know why. It's like some kind of midlife crisis problem. But mostly what I'm writing these days is writing with or writing stuff about Perl 5, which came out in 1994. All right, so Perl 5 is just about 20. That's all I have to say about that. It's just, wow. Okay, so I had a couple things I could talk about today, and it roughly divides into two groups. I could talk about awesome, cool stuff that's in Perl 5.20 that you're going to be excited about and want to use and make you want to upgrade. Or I could talk about all the challenges facing Perl that kind of make you go, oh, how are we going to overcome that? And what I realized is I only have time for like one of those. So you can guess which one I'm going to talk about. If you want to talk about problems, you can talk to me later. We can have a beer or 10. But now I want to talk about cool new stuff in Perl because Perl 5.20 has cool new stuff. In the past, when I've talked about cool new stuff in Perl, I always have started talking about feature.pm, which is a way to turn off and on features that have erupted into existence over the past 5 or 6 years. I'm not going to talk about it today except to say it exists. If you don't know about it because you're still running version 5.8, you should go read about feature. It's important. Instead, I'm going to talk about something analogous and new called experiments. Perl has always had experiments, at least since very close to the beginning. And experiments are just features we're trying out. We don't know how they're going to go. They might not stick around. We might want to throw them away, or we might change them significantly, but we want to roll them out so that you can use them and people who are writing code in Perl can see how they work and where the problems are, because we don't see them all to begin with and we want to put them into deployment. But we don't want to put them into like your mission critical, you've built your business on this experiment, because that's awful. Because we might rip them out or change the way they work. And what's going to happen is you're going to say, whoa, I didn't know it was an experiment. Where did you tell me it was an experiment? And we say, well, if you had read Perl 5.7.3 Delta, you would have clearly seen at the bottom, we said this feature is considered possibly experimental. We're not sure what's going to happen. I don't know anyway. So you wanted to change this and make it really, really clear what an experiment is, have a protocol about it, and use this to keep Perl's momentum up. And the way it works is, like, we take a feature like Smart Match, or lexical subroutines, or auto deref that we consider experimental. So how does a feature like this work? If you tried writing this in Perl, you're going to get a syntax error, because it's going to say, I don't know what's up with given. Roughly, this is what's happening. It doesn't know what given is about. Because given might have meant something else in your old code. We wanted to steal that keyword, and we do it by turning on a feature with feature. So you'd have to say use feature switch. And now you don't get any problems. Everything works because you've enabled the new feature. Unless you're using a new Perl where we have semi-retroactively declared that smart matching was an experiment, because everybody knew we had to change it and we want to make sure everybody knows it's in flux. So in a new Perl, 5.18, 5.20, you'll get this warning. Your code will work, but it's going to say, hey man, given is an experiment. We don't know what's going to happen. But you don't want that warning, okay? You know this code is only going to run on 5.18, or it's a one-off that you're using to demonstrate something, so you want to turn the warning off. So you put into your code, okay, use feature switch and don't warn me about the experimental smart match feature. So now it's working, except then you take that code and you want to run it on Perl 5.16. And on Perl 5.16, we did have switch, but we didn't have the warning, so it's going to say, I don't know what warning you're talking about. There is no warning called this. Well, that's great. We have a solution for that too. If you saw my talk yesterday, you might know it's use if. So all you have to do is say, I want to use switch and No, if I am using a version greater than or equal to 5.018, then turn off these warnings, right? So obviously that sucks, and what we actually do is you say, I want to use the experimental smart match feature. It turns the feature on. If there are warnings related to it, it turns them off, and you have very clearly had to say, I'm using an experimental feature, I know, and you can use it, you can do whatever you want, you can build your business on it, just don't say we didn't warn you, because we did. Okay? And I think this is really important for us to do. It's, I think, the most important change that I've seen happen in the last 2 years as far as policy goes is that we have experiments that are clearly marked experiments. It lets us be agile and not have people say, well, but I've actually been using that experimental feature in production for 6 years and you didn't, you know, it's a big bummer. Okay, so on to actual cool stuff you can use, like postfix dereferencing. I have been asking for this for a long time. I always knew it was going to be awesome. Now we have it and it's awesome. So you got some thing, okay? And in it, there's some other thing, because it's a hash ref. And the hash ref value contains an object, and you call a method on that. Okay, so this is just standard dereferencing and method calling of stuff using our arrow operator. And logins returns an array ref, and we want to push something onto it. So you can't just do a push at the end, like by saying, I want to push onto the session's user's logins. If we do this, it might work if we're on Perl 5.14, and if this thing at runtime turns out to be an array reference. But unless you want to use this experimental feature, which by the way is probably going to go away, you have to explicitly say, don't worry, I promise that the thing in here is going to be an array reference. And you do that by going back and wrapping the whole thing using a circumfix operator. I don't like that, because I like to read from left to right. From left to right for those of you on the other side of me. I don't mind reading the other way as long as I only have to read in one direction. But these circumfix operations make you read in both directions at once. 5.14 lets you drop them, but it only helps in some places anyway. Like for example, I'm going to push onto there, and it's going to work. We're running 5.14, and that's going to return an array ref, and you can push onto an array ref. And I want to push onto it what? Something from the queue, something unflushed from the queue, all the logins that are unflushed out of my queue. But this is going to return an array ref. So it doesn't know it can automatically dereference that to push the elements on. It can't. That is entirely ambiguous. There's no machine disambiguation that can occur. So we have to tell it this one has to be array dereferenced. And so we're back to using circumfix. So the automatic dereferencing, letting us push onto a ref or get keys of a ref, it seems like it's going to help, but it only helps some places. And you start longing for this to be easier and not wrapping stuff and going back and reading in two directions at once. Or if we wanted to pass stuff to a subroutine, right? We have to wrap it and dereference it there. Or we want to do a map, right? We end up doing all this circumfix dereferencing. I hope you can all read this, so the slides are a little small on the screen. And it's a mess. And it's one of the reasons even well-written Perl can end up looking gross, because there are these functions that are standard built-in operations we do all the time. And how do we do them? Well, with a bunch of squiggly stuff wrapped around. So I have an idea about moving the squiggly stuff. I'm going to keep it, right? We need squiggly stuff, or we'll be writing in, I don't know, Swift. And instead of doing all this, instead of relying on this automatically dereferencing, we're going to dereference explicitly, but not with the obnoxious go back and go back thingy. We're just going to say, I want you to get this object, get the entry out of it, get the array ref, and then turn it into a list, right? Dereference it by putting stuff over at the end. You're still reading everything left to right. So that's nice, but unlike the implicit automatic dereferencing on push or keys, this can apply everywhere. We can use this anywhere you can write any kind of Perl. So we want to push that thing on there, great, let's make that postfix. We want to pass the array into process, let's make that postfix. Or these maps, right? This thing, we'll turn that into postfix. And how about this guy, right? So we're getting $pound, the last index in the thing. We can do that with postfix. So anything you used to be doing with these circumfix squiggle brace dereferencing, you can now do postfix. That means any place that you used to write at brace expression, you stick that at the end. Yeah. arrow at splat. There's also arrow at arrow % splat, dollar splat for scalar derefs. You can get subroutines out of references. You can get globs out. All right, right? Consistency is not a bad thing. You can get the last index out. And this is all great. You can use it anywhere. You can use it inside of strings. You can use it anywhere. It works with prototypes. It does everything the way you want. But it gets even cooler because you can write a slice out of a list. I can never, ever remember how to slice out of a reference. Now it's easy. You have the reference, and you say, I want an array slice. Here are the indices. You can do the same thing with a hash. I want the value slice. Just stick it at the end. You can do this again, right? OK, why not? Right? You can pull out a glob entry, which actually, let me tell you, although you probably will never use this, getting hunks out of a type glob is just, you do it rarely enough that even if you know how you're doing, at least I always forget exactly the syntax. This I will never forget. It's super easy. You can put it inside of string interpolation, right? So where you used to have to, this is a nice slice. You used to have to do this like at array ref inside of squiggles followed by the arrow and the braces, or maybe no, I don't know. Now this just works. It works the same way it works anywhere else. You can do put a string reference in there. So that's postfix dereferencing. I converted a bunch of my programs to use it during 5.19, and it was awesome. And I went back to anything else, and it was just coming out of my fingers. And then I'd have to stop and fix it and cry. But now you can just use it because 5.20 is out. Now, postfix dereferencing is experimental, which means we might change it or remove it. But we're not going to change it or remove it. Don't tell anyone I said that. But I mean, the fact of the matter is it's perfect. No, it's really nice. I don't think it's going to change. Maybe it will. Maybe somebody will find some crazy flaw. But so far, I haven't seen a single problem with it in like the 4 weeks that it's been deployed. So it's probably perfect. If you want to use it, you have to say use experimental post deref. One other thing, it's broken into 2 features. You can turn on postfix dereferencing inside of and outside of double quoted strings separately. Just use this. It turns them both on. OK. Optimizations, right? Everybody likes a faster Perl. I'm just going to talk. I've got some little things I want to talk about like this. So optimizations. Here's a program. As you can tell, this is a program that many of us have written. It's a very, very useful, powerful program which makes a 1 megabyte string and then makes 1 million copies of it in memory. Right, really, really useful. If you run this program on Perl 5.18.2, it will take about a minute, because it's got to make a whole zillion million copies. If you run the same program on Perl 5.20, it's going to use a new optimization to do copy on write. Excuse me. And what copy on write does is it just shares that string. And it doesn't need to copy it unless you change it. Right? This is Unix. This is how all kinds of stuff works, and that's the way we want our strings to work. So if you run that same program on 5.20, it takes 0.1 second. Just before 5.20 came out, we found a nasty bug and we fixed it, and now this doesn't always take effect when it should. But it often takes effect. And often is better than never, and it's going to get better and better as things go. We're going to see in time how much gain we get out of this, but let me tell you, there really is gain to be gotten out of it. Here's another good one. These 2 little programs, 2 statements here. Which one is faster? Oh, I'm really sorry. This is Latin small letter y with diaresis, and this is 2 characters. This is Latin small letter y and then a combining diaresis. I thought that would be clear. So anyone? The first one is faster. The first one is faster because the optimizer will just skip any regular expression that contains something trans 0255. Right? Any character that doesn't fit in an octet, it's like, I don't know. Why? Because, I don't know, I just didn't. Well, that's fixed, right? So now the optimizer will optimize stuff with wide characters in it. Here's another one. Which one of these is faster? Second. Is it the second one? I don't even know. The point is, one of these was faster, and that's stupid, right? So we fixed it. And The way we fixed it is, by the way, to make the slow one faster and not the fast ones. We've done that in the past. People didn't like it. Okay, enough optimization. Cross-compilation. So Perl has had cross-compile facilities for a long time, and they're sort of long-suffering, and they got a whole lot of work in the last 2 years. And now I am told I have not done it because I am an Apple user. I am told you can compile now onto Android out of the box, which is pretty cool. Now Android is cool, and everybody's happy to have Android, but I thought it was really important, right? We also should pay attention to other important mobile platforms. So we got both. Not only can you compile out of the box into Android, but also WinCE. So we've upgraded our Unicode to 6.3 from 6.2. So there's some benefits, right? Like this guy. Everybody knows this character. Anybody? I'll give you a hint. No? This is the Mongolian vowel separator, of course. We fixed its general category. It used to be marked as a separator. Why would you do that? It's other formatting. This one, combining diaresis. This is not ellipsis minus one dot, although that would be a good name too. The combining diaresis has been fixed. It does not affect case comparisons. Great. The BIDI paired brackets. BIDI. Anybody know BIDI? Bidirectionality, right? It's for languages that write the wrong way. And there's a thing about paired brackets and like marking which ones pair which other ones. So Unicode 6.3 includes this data, which tells you stuff like the left parenthesis opens and the right parenthesis closes. And they're all pairs. And that means that given any opening bracket, you can find the closing bracket. So what cool stuff can you do with that? Well, so if you know the first character, you can find the second character, and you can do things like say, hey, if I know which one opens and which one's closed, I could use that for like a quoted string. And so maybe if you were like doing Japanese programming and you had the left corner bracket and the right corner bracket, you could do this. Okay, we didn't implement it yet. But now we can. Also, just added this last week, Unicode just released, the Unicode Consortium released Unicode 7, and within 12 hours it was in Perl. Because of Carl Williamson, who is a machine who deserves everyone's thanks and praise forever. So we now have Unicode 7, but it's in 5.21.1. It gives us like really cool new characters. And the character everybody's talking about is this one. Anybody know this character's name?
Levitating man from business.
At the last minute, it's actually been renamed. This character is now Rude Boy. Okay. So, warnings. Who has used fatal warnings? Yeah, all right, fine. Fatal warnings like always result in these big arguments on the mailing list, and we love it. But when you see fatal warnings and you want to look them up, where do you go to look them up? Diagnostics. Anybody else? Perl-Lex warning. I always go to look at Perl-Doc warnings. And what does Perl-Doc warnings tells you about? It tells you about how to build your own warning categories. And who has ever built their own warning category? Did it work out for you? No. No, it doesn't work. It's terrible. So if you wanted to know about how fatal warnings work and how warnings in general work, how do warnings work? I know, I'll look up warnings. No, you look up Perl-Lex warn, which is named, of course, by hateful programmers in accordance with the ancient lex talionis. The law of suffering. So now we fixed that. This is my favorite patch maybe I've ever made to Perl. Everything is in Perl-Doc warnings. You can actually find it and figure out how to fix this, who put these fatal warnings in your documentation. Okay, so here's a program, a subroutine. So we get some input, and we return the score for whatever the input was. I'm sorry, that should say input. That is not the bug. That should say input. And if we didn't get a score, then we die. Okay? So what's the bug?
Scope.
Scope? No, not scope. It's precedence. Okay, the bug is precedence. And what's going to happen is the OR happens after the return, not after the score for. We've used the wrong logical. It should be a double pipe operator. Now we issue a warning, right? And the warning is going to say, hey man, I don't think that's the one you meant to use. You probably should have used double pipe and not OR, because it's the wrong precedence, and you will never, ever, 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 ever be able to execute that die because return will already have happened. Now, it's easy to think, well, yeah, but who's going to make that bug, right? Like and anyway, I wrote tests. So Rainier Urban went through and did a whole bunch of testing and found all these tickets and filed tickets against everybody who had made this mistake. And some of the candidates included IO all, IO async, JSON, Dybbuk, Perl critic. That's got a smart. IO socket SSL, parse cpan Mason, DBI, test more, and probably your code too. So that is officially the best new warning of 5.20. Other things to be concerned about: locales. Yeah. Okay, so locales exist. So that happened. In 5.20, UTF-8 locales work, right? Don't use them, but they work if you have to. And if your OS has no locale support and you try to use them, your program no longer goes down in flames. It just uses C, which is what it should do, the C locale. We've got a new debugging facility for tracing locale stuff. I really hope you never have to use it, but now it's there. And the radix character doesn't leak. Now you're thinking, what? I'm going to show you some of my favorite slides. I've got a program. It's a nice, simple program. I'm loading locale stuff. And in here, I'm going to do something with locales. I don't know what, something. But you'll notice what I don't do in here. Locale, by the way, is a lexical pragma. It only takes effect inside this block. What I am not doing in here is anything with $x. $x is a number. The number is 1.234. I do something, and then I say the number. So of course, what is printed is 1.234. Actually, you get 1,234. Why? Because, yeah, well, because it's German. But why does it affect that number? No, it's just a bug. It's just some crap. Yeah, I mean, it might come down to sprintf and the underlying locale, blah, 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 blah. But it's a ridiculous, stupid bug. Okay, and the thing is, this doesn't have to be right between those lines. It can be happening in some distant package because the locale that's being affected is a global program problem, right? It's not just even this interpreter. It's the whole C program. And so your program could have looked like this, right? I've got a number, I do some stuff, and then I say it, and I get a comma, WTF. Okay, but what's even awesomer than this is maybe you're not just printing the number out. Because if I saw that number how many do you have left? 1,234. Okay, first of all, I might be confused and think it's thousands, but if I know the domain and I know that there's some German going on, I'm probably okay, except what if I'm sending this over JSON, right? So I should be sending the value is 1.234. Actually, I send this, and the remote end is blah. That's not JSON. You're sending YAML or something. And that's bad enough. Making the remote end barf, that's going to ruin my day. But you know what's going to ruin it more is if instead of sending an object, I'd been sending a list. Because now I'm going to send 4 things instead of 3. Whoops. Yeah, we fixed that. There's also a lot of changes that have happened and that are going to keep happening to this idea of the underlying locale. I don't want to get too much into this, but the way things work is that your program, when it's running, has one underlying locale that affects all kinds of stuff. And Perl likes to think, I'm in charge of setting that. And then sometimes you link with something else that thinks it's in charge of setting that. And we're trying to... Yeah, yes, it's great with threads, as is everything. And we're trying to kind of separate that out. So if you use locales in your program, you should totes try it with 5.20, because we might have broken it, by which I mean fixed it. Okay, here's another great one. Okay, so you got a program. And it's using your awesome configuration management, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, whatever, to go and find out the status of all your hosts. And it gives it to you in that most famous of formats, CSV. And it tells you all the hosts, its status, its mood, and its number. So then you're going to write another program to aggregate this data. And you're going to do it with a Perl one-liner, because Perl one-liners are awesome. And it's going to look like this. I want to pipe this through a program. And for each line, I want to split on comma and then deal with new lines. And here's what you do. Print the first thing is the second thing. So it should say my host is up, right? Everybody agree? Yeah. Yeah, right. But you run it, and what does it say? It says space is space. And you're like, dude, what happened? This is a totally cromulent program. I said, like, for each line, split on comma, and then here's what you do. Except you forgot the A. That means split. You can give a delimiter all you want. Thanks to the delimiter, but you didn't say to split, so I didn't split. So we fixed it, right? Now if you say dash F, it means dash A. And if you say dash A, it means dash N. Yeah, as God intended. People on YouTube are just hearing me crunch on ice. I'm really sorry. And so your program does the right thing. Great. And you can even drop the N, and it would work. My suggestion from now on is just start dropping arguments to Perl and see if it keeps working. More good stuff. Rand doesn't suck anymore, kind of. It used to be that, so Rand would often give you something like 48 bits of pseudo-random number, which is okay for a lot of stuff. Just for some stuff. But on Windows, it wasn't even good for some stuff, because you get 15 bits. And we fixed that. Now everywhere we have our own DRAND 48, and you get that, which is nice. But not that nice, so let's talk about something more exciting. Let's talk about pairs. Okay, so here's an array. It's got some words in it. I made these up myself. And if we take a slice of it that looks like that, then what we get in the slice is element 1 and element 3, right? So bar quux, it gives us a list of elements by index. Great, this has been around since Perl 5.20, maybe even earlier, I don't know. It's been around forever. And you can do the same thing with a hash. So I've got a hash, and when I pull out a list of values. So just like with an array, where I pull out the values by index, I say I want @ for the list of values, and then indexes of an array are keys. So A and C. So what should I get? Anybody?
1 and 3.
1 and 3, absolutely. And it's exactly what I get, 1 and 3. Not a trick question yet. Now in 5.20, you can replace the @ sign with a % sign. And what you get is not a list of values, but a list of pairs. So now you're getting a subset of that hash. Right? This is crazy useful. Then you can also do that. You can assign it to an array. Why not? Because what you get is not a hash. Right? You're not getting like a hash subset. You're getting a list of pairs, and that means you can get duplicates. So I want the pair for A, the pair for D, which doesn't exist, and the pair for A. So what do you get? You get A1, D undef, A1 again. Really useful. Here's an example of why it's so useful. I'm building up my music collection. Earlier this month, I deleted about 10% of all my MP3s. It was the worst. This really happened. And so now I'm building it back up. So I've got this thing. I'm like rebuilding my music database and looking at my code. What's the bug? The label is misspelled once. Right? This is the kind of bug we make all the time. And why did I make this error? Because I had to type it twice. Right? Even if I'd spelled it right, I've got all this stupid duplication. So why don't I just write like artist, artist, title, title, tracks, tracks. I don't like to type the same thing twice. And it's not because I'm lazy. I'm not lazy. No. It's not because I'm lazy. It's because I'm going to screw up. It's because I'm bad. So now I can write this. Right? I had some data, some named arguments, and I'm going to pull out those pairs and pass them in. Now you're wondering, why didn't I fix this too? Does anybody know why I didn't fix that too? Because it's like in a hash reference. So okay, here's a little thought experiment. You've got a hash ref that looks like this, and you want to pull out a slice of its values. So like, what's the syntax for getting a slice of values out of a hash reference that's inside of a hash reference? Yeah, people are raising your hands. Yeah, you're very clever. I'm not. Okay, I can't do it. So you start with this, and you're like, okay, I think it's this. Right, I get the hash reference and then the keys out of it, and it says, nope, you just get undef. What? Okay. Okay, so maybe I needed a circumfix and an @ sign, so it's like you try this, and that looks pretty good. And it says, no, that's not an array reference. I'm not sure what's not the array reference, but something wasn't an array reference, and Perl really wanted an array reference, so okay. I'm gonna like grasp at a straw, and I'm gonna try this one. And I'm like moving my squigglies around at this point. I've got like a bisection algorithm. And I just get nothing. I get an empty list from this one. So I tried this, and that one works. So what this tells us is, in Perl, you can figure anything out with only 4 tries. No, right? So there's a real solution here, and it's not just to remember things, because that's right out. The solution is we just postfix dereference that pair slice out. Right? Okay, so it's nice when features work together. It's like we designed this language or something. Okay, so that's awesome. And you can use it on arrays. It's by index. So you can pull out elements 1 and 3, and what do you get out? This is wrong. It should not. Oh no, this is right. So here we're going back to a normal list slice. We're pulling out values. You can tell they're values because it's one circle. One circle for values. Two circles. Two circles when there's a key and a value. Okay. And then we would get the keys and the values. Again, really, really nice and useful. Okay. Again, and they come out in the order you ask for them. So those are pair slices. Pair slices are not an experimental feature. They're just obviously right? They make sense, they work, they're great. I'm going to use them like crazy. I already am. Okay, enough of that big one. Let's talk about, I had my phone up here to keep time, and I didn't keep time. So somebody should tell me if I'm running out of time. Perfect, because I'm halfway through my slides. I want to talk about some bug fixes. I've gone through and I've carefully curated a list. I selected them by how hilarious I thought they were. This is how hilarious I thought they were. I sometimes have a different sense of humor about what bugs are really funny. So just deal with it. So here's some selections from the Perl Delta. If you combine a split operator whose third argument is a named constant evaluating to 0, okay? So it looks like this. You're doing a split of some string, and how many fields do you want out? It's in a constant, and this constant has to evaluate to 0. So this is kind of a very specific case, but it's not a crazy one, right? This could totally happen. So what's the bug? What's the bug fix? Doing this no longer changes the value of the constant. Sorry. I mean, to be fair, it only changed the value the first time, and then it stuck because it wasn't 0 anymore. It's hardly a bug at all. Okay.
I use that feature.
Yeah, well, you can give. I have nothing to say to that. Here's another one. Okay, so you've got a QR object, right? It's a regular expression object. And if you use it as a Boolean, it's true because it's an object. And it doesn't overload Boolean evaluation or anything. It's not that crazy. If you use its scalar dereference, is that true or not? It was usually true. And then it stopped being true in like 5.18-ish. And now it's true again. So the hilarious thing is not the bug of the bug fix. The hilarious thing is somebody noticed this. Right? They were like, man, I was using that in my code because I just scalar dereference everything. And if it's, what are you doing, man? That ain't right. Okay. This is a pretty decent bug fix, right? If you make a large range, like 1 through 1 trillion, that's 1 trillion, your program will no longer crash. Awesome. This is not the entire Perl Delta entry. It will no longer crash. It will use up all your memory instead. So we've been fixing some bugs that will make your life different. We've also killed off some features. Killing off features is a lot of fun. You get to find out who secretly hates you because you've killed their favorite feature. So here's a good one, right? So you got a subroutine. This is the power of Perl. In only 4 lines, we can do addition. And we call this. Now this is a tough one, but there are some experienced people here. What does this evaluate to? 3. Very good. I don't always see the same hands though. Okay, so that's 3. And you can also call this. That's 3 if you're an old school Perl 3 programmer. And if you really want, you can call this. Did you know you could call this? Yeah, Chip knew. Of course Chip knew. But you.
Code that broke when this changed.
Sorry. Yeah, so like this was in use. I get it. Like it was around, but one of the changelog notes was something like, by removing this calling convention, we have eliminated 2% of the Perl grammar. Like, Now, to be fair, that's only like, I don't know, 60 lines of code, but that's a ton. Okay, how about this guy? Anybody know this variable? This is a variable, okay, a couple people. This is a variable, it's a private variable, and it is used to store compile time hints. It's a bit field where we put things like strictures are turned on, warnings are turned on, stuff open is set, things like that. There's another way to write this variable. You don't have to call it $h. It's very rarely used. You can write it like this. Now, oh, I'm sorry. This is a problem with Keynote. What I've actually written here is a $sign and a backspace. If you put a literal backspace, what is the control code? Anyone? Control H, right? So any of these variables, Control T, right? You could, or $T, you could put a Control T. I don't know what a Control T is. $X, the name of the Perl interpreter. You could write $cancels, and you'd get the name of the Perl interpreter. This becomes interesting with a character like this. Control K, anyone? Vertical tabulation. Yeah. So the vertical tab, it's like a tab for indenting if you code in Japanese, right? It moves all your text down in theory. Now, does anyone ever use this character? Not really. I've never seen it ever used for anything other than stunts. But
like PDF to plain text.
They use it? Okay, so some PDF stuff uses it. But in Perl, it was like this character that you couldn't see that seemed like space but wasn't space, and you could write $vertical tab. Your editor is like, I don't care about vertical tabs. Nobody uses those. I'm not a PDF editor. So you just get like a $sign blank equals, and you're assigning to $K. $K, by the way, is not a Perl variable. It's not used for anything. But this rule applies to anything you want. So you could just use this. Well, we fixed the Perl grammar to use the Unicode definition of space for any kind of space, and this character is a space character. So suddenly, if you're using a modern Perl, like some of your variables have just turned into $equals sign because you said like space character equals. And for those of you who are not Abigail, you can put spaces between your sigils and their names, and it all works. I bet you didn't know that. I bet you wish you still didn't know that. We've pulled some stuff out of core, or are pulling stuff out of core that you should start stopping to use it now, like A to P, the awk to Perl translator. I know everyone is still busily converting their awk scripts. Sed to Perl, find to Perl, and of course the Perl to Ruby Why were we shipping that anyway? That's a terrible idea. No, I'm kidding. We're going to keep that one. We're also removing some modules from core, CGI.pm, after its long reign. I will say, if it were not for CGI.pm, I probably would not be a Perl programmer. So I am not in the down with CGI.pm, burn it and kill it, but I'm glad it's gone. Module build is coming out of the core. You can still use module build. Everything should work. It installs from the cpan, but we don't want to ship it anymore. It does not gain us anything. And encoding.pm. This is a long, complicated thing. I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but let me say encoding.pm is leaving the core. If you use encoding.pm, for reals, come talk to me later because I want to ask you questions. Okay. I'm going to slow down now. So I think I've only got one more thing to talk about. And I might end up with time at the end, which would be great because there's tons of other things I can answer. But there's one other feature to talk about in Perl 5.20. So here's a simple Perl program. We saw it earlier. What I didn't ask you then was to tell me what's wrong with this program. Sorry? Undeaf, sure. Yeah, what if they were undeaf? You get a warning. To me, the biggest problem with this is this stupid @_, right? This is stupid, right? Like, it confuses people. They're like, what are you doing here? Like, you wrote a function, and then you're getting stuff out of this array. Where does this array come from? OK, so you can explain it. And you're like, OK, well, in Perl, when you call a subroutine, we stick stuff in this variable, then you copy it out later, and it's OK. People get used to it, and it's fine. We all probably got used to it. But when you're explaining it to new people, you sound like you're describing like this horrible thing that you just have to make an apology for. And then you have to explain really, really complicated features and how they work, like defaults, right? So like, oh, well, they default to 0. They're like, wait, I thought we were using @_. Why are you saying shift? Well, if you say shift with no argument, it pulls off of $_ or at underscore. Really? Well, yeah, unless you're not in a subroutine. I mean, that's different. So like explaining this stuff is it's sad, and it doesn't work like every other language, and there's no good explanation. It's like, what are we programming in Fortran? Well, no, because Fortran had signatures. So we added something. You can write this. Whoa! And you can call, right, add 1 and 2, and as was seen by the experts earlier, you get 3. And if you call add with no arguments, what do we get? You get a runtime error, right? You didn't have enough arguments. Or add with 1. No. Add 1, 2, 3. It's an error, right? This function has an arity of 2. Those of you who only program in Perl may not have realized this sort of thing was possible. In reality, this is what programming is like outside of this hotel. If you want to not get an error when someone says add 1, it's fine. You can do that. You just say, I want x. You got to pass me x. And if you don't give me y, it's 0. Right? And now add 1 and 2 is 3. Add with nothing is still a runtime error. Add 1, you get 1, because y defaults to 0. And 1, 2, 3 gives you a runtime error. It's too many arguments. Now, you could also try doing this. And anybody who's programmed not in Perl, what should this do? It's a compile time error. The first thing can't have a default if the second thing is required. What would that even mean? It means that you have a problem with your brain, and you should resume programming tomorrow. If you wanted to say that everything after that has a default, you specify it, right? So now, add has 2 defaults. And so you could get 1 and 2 is 3. Add alone, anyone? 0. Adding 1 is 1. And if you have too many arguments, it's still a runtime error, okay? Like, this should all be pretty obvious, but the fact that we're adding this after only, what was it again, 20 years? It bears some repeating. Now, this all is pretty obvious stuff. And a lot of the design for this comes from, look at what the other Perl-like languages do. Right? How does Ruby work with this? How does Python work with this? They have done this for a long time, and we want the people who are programming in those languages, when they come to Perl, to just have their expectations met. And I'll tell you, most of the code, more than half anyway, of the code that I write is in Perl. And it has been for at least 10 years, more than that, 15 years, I don't know how long I've been writing Perl. And still, when I would write subroutines, I would write, sub foo paren $x, because that's just how you program, at least in these kind of languages. So we stole from everybody we could. But in Perl, the point is not to steal from everyone else and stop. It is to steal from everyone else and walk right to the edge of where they had all stopped and jump. So there's still another problem with the way we've implemented this. And can anyone tell me what the problem is? Prototyping? Well, no, we'll come back to that. The problem is this is going to be so slow. Right? It's not because subroutine signatures are slow. They're fast. That's not a problem. It's that we know that they're both 0. Why do we have to add them at all? Right? If y was 0, we could just say, yeah, if you didn't give me y, just return x. So we shave off a good, 2 opcodes there, man. It's great. And of course, if it's good for the goose, right, it's good for the gander, and we'll do the same thing. So that's pretty cool. And everything works as you'd expect, but runs 1 attosecond faster. If you wonder what the hell is going on here, it is time to break out Dparse. Who here uses Dparse? A lot of people. That's really good to hear. Who uses Dparse every day? That is also good to hear. If you use Dparse every day, you are doing it wrong. Dparse is a thingy. It's a module, I think we call them. It comes with Perl. And it lets Perl compile all your code, and then it decompiles it, and you get to see what Perl thinks that you were trying to say. This is really, really useful when you and Perl are having an argument, because it is the only way to get Perl to explain itself to you. So we've got that program, right, that we wrote before. And we're going to run, and we put it in a file called adder. And we're going to run the program like this. O is change the backend. Read Perl.o. It's pretty cool. But what we're saying is this is how you deparse a program. So you run it. And instead of running your program, it prints this out. Your program has compiled to this. That is how all of this got computed, right? These are the exceptions you will get. Then the assignment happens, and then it does the math and returns. If you use that crazy form, where we're going to skip the addition, what happens is you get this. So the default for y is, if you got a y, then use it. Otherwise, evaluate return x. That's just Perl, right? That's just going to kick us out of the subroutine. So the signature looks kind of bizarre. You can guess at what it does. But if you don't want to trust your guess, you can ask Perl, tell me what the heck this really means. And you'll see the code for it. If we take this guy, the 2 returns out of defaults, and we deparse that, we get this. Now, first of all, let's admit, no human would stack code this way. But you can read it and see what's going on. Now, there's one other thing you might notice. Does anybody notice the actual serious bug in the way the code has been printed out? There's no $y, right? And that is not because we have switched to Ruby-style declarations. It's because Dparse isn't perfect. Okay? So just like sometimes you can't explain yourself, sometimes neither can Perl. Sometimes no one can explain Perl. But you can deparse this guy and see exactly what's happening. If you got at least one thing, that's what you put in X. And otherwise, return 0 and then do some kind of assignment. This ends up making sense if you read it. It's a long, long time. What all of this means is that we have strict arity checking. Arity is the number of arguments you accept to your function. And you have to pass exactly that many. It means no fewer than the count of required parameters, and no more than the count of all possible parameters. So this is fine, except there exist things that we call variatic functions. And a variatic function takes some unknown number of inputs. So this guy is going to take a factor and some number of inputs. Okay? How are we going to translate that into a signature? It's just what you'd hope, which is this. Right? It's fine. And how does the arity work? You've got to have at least one thing and no more than an infinite number, a max int or something. Because an empty list is OK. Right? This is OK, can be 0. What will you get back? You'll get back an empty list. And you can have as many inputs as you want, and that's fine too. So variatic functions just work. And they work with one nice little extra, which is if you write it like this, you need at least 2, because this guy has no default, this has no default, and then as many more as you want, but it has to be an even number. So if you tried passing in an odd number of parameters when you're expecting to end in a list, it's going to throw a runtime exception. By the way, this is not how I would write this code. I would use a pair slice. OK. Something you can't do is this. You can't slurp into lists. What would that mean? I don't know. Because then you could try calling it like this. And which ones go where? Well, you just look at the variable names and see how they match up. Abbreviations are also supported. I don't know, right? This doesn't work. So you can only have one. We call them slurpee. After it's stolen from Perl 6. You can only have one slurpee parameter. Goes at the end. It can be a list or an array. It can be a hash. But you can only have one, and it goes at the end. OK. So back to this guy. We're all very familiar with addition by this point. My next talk will move on to subtraction. So I've got some summands, 8 and 6, and I want to add them. OK? So what's the answer? 14 seems pretty obvious at first. But then you remember, this is Perl. obvious, sometimes that's for the other guys. So 2, right? Maybe it's 2. So this looks like we're going to take x and y and add them. And 8 plus 6, as some correctly probably guessed, maybe you knew, it's 14. But what if you had written this program? Well, then you'd be taking those arrays in scalar context. And that was one array, which had 2 elements, plus 0. So does the first thing imply the second thing? They both have dollar signs in them, right? Dollar sign, dollar sign, dollar sign, dollar sign. Could be. So either we get 14 or we get 2. Who thinks it's 14? Just a couple hands. Who thinks it's 2? A couple hands. A lot of people not committing.
I think it's a list of 2 answers.
Yeah, it's right. It gets adjunctive superposition. The answer is 14. And does anyone know why it's 14?
Because it makes sense.
Yes. Because 2 would be stupid.
You don't need it.
Yeah. I don't want to be murdered. So you can do lots of cool stuff with these. So for example, you've got this code. You get a callback and a bunch of inputs. And we call it over and over and over. Right? That's pretty easy stuff. How might we use it? We might say, say each one of these numbers. Okay, so here's your inputs. They go in at rest. And the first thing is a code ref. It goes in there. Fine. Right. And if we want to use a signature, hopefully by this point it's obvious. We just shove it up there. But we might also want to have a prototype. Now prototypes were just that thing we said were stupid. Right? Because they're going to say that 8 plus 6 is 2, which I have been told by many of my math teachers is not correct. But sometimes they're useful, like here. Now we can't just stick them inside of parentheses because we've stolen that. So what do? We use the new prototype attribute. This has 2 benefits. One benefit is you can still use prototypes. The other benefit is it's harder. Like you have to type more because you probably don't want to usually use them. But having done this, the nice thing that happens, and this is not a new feature, this is a function of the way Perl has worked for a long time, is now you can write this, which is pretty nice. So your code can still do this, but you've gotten the benefit of signatures. And there's more benefit of signatures to keep talking about. This is kind of like mostly me talking about signatures, but dude, they're huge.
How does that work with my sub map?
How does that work with my sub map? I don't know. Let's figure it out later. Okay. Okay, so we've written a logger. It's something we all implement from time to time. And logger is a method. Logger has a log method. Now notice I have said $self in here. It doesn't know it's a method. It's still Perl, right? Subroutines, method, same thing. There's no difference. And that means you need to say $self. So we have said $self. And what do we do when somebody calls the log method? We pass the message on to syslog. Okay? This is about the simplest example I could come up with. Sometimes when we're testing, we don't want to send stuff to syslog. So we want to create a class with exactly the same behavior that doesn't do anything. So we write the null logger class that does nothing. Okay? It gets the message, it drops it on the floor. That's fine. But there's no reason that we needed to get $message, right? Why are we copying it into a variable? Now, copy on write might make it faster, but why do we have to do it at all, right? Why don't we throw it on the floor? Now, in lots and lots of languages, what's the key to telling this to throw the thing on the floor? You need it, but throw it on the floor. It's the low line. The underscore character, used all over the place. Prolog, Haskell, I think. I'm not going to, Scala, lots of places use this. It's a convention for saying, give me an argument which I don't care about. But we can't use that in Perl. And there's 2 reasons. One of them is like the last stat thing or underscore. Maybe you could disambiguate that. But the other one is, what kind of thing are you asking me to get and throw away? Is it one thing? Or is it an unknown number of things? Or is it an even unknown number of things? So you write this, and you're like, okay, well, I got an idea. I'm going to keep the sigil, right? So I'm going to keep the sigil and say, there's going to be a list of things, but don't worry, I don't care about it. And we indicate that we don't care about it with underscore because we want to not surprise anyone, and we do this. right? And then like your head explodes and you die. And then you get back up and you're like, okay, I'm going to keep going. I don't care about the x either. And you do this. And then your head explodes again. Okay, so we can't get rid of the name and use underscore. Well, screw the underscore then. Let's just get rid of the name. And you can say this. There needs to be a scalar parameter here. It has to be there, but throw it away. And as long as we're doing that for message, we might as well do it for self. So now we have a subroutine with an arity of exactly 2 where we throw away the inputs. So this lets us emulate other interfaces correctly. Yes? This question?
What about a single throwaway? Does that get reinterpreted as a prototype?
No, it does not get interpreted as a prototype. So the question was, if there's only one throwaway, would it be interpreted as a single $1 prototype? No. The way we determine whether you mean a prototype is whether you have said, I want to use signatures. Using signatures is a lexical experimental pragma. If you use it, you must use :prototype for prototypes, and anything else is a signature. Okay, so maybe message should have a default in our top guy here. Like if you say log something, but you didn't give us a message, we don't want to throw an undef warning, so we just say, well, if you didn't give us anything, default it to empty string. But now this has a different interface, and we are failing to emulate the right interface. Keeping track of interfaces between multiple implementations can be a little pain, but it's a huge win. So what do? Well, we put a default on there, right? So, and the way the defaults work is, if you didn't give us a value, we get the default and we put it into the storage, but there's no storage. So what's the point of that? There isn't one. So we just say, act like there's a default. Okay? If you want, you could put a default there. You could put like, return. You could put return there if you were a bad person. But you can just say this. There's a scalar. Okay, so. Sorry? You don't need the space. Unfortunately, you don't need the space. So it looks a little like $equals, which is some kind of format variable. I'm sorry. Okay, this guy. So like I said, we have strict arity checking, which means if you call this, you have to give it no more than 2 functions, or 2 arguments. 0 is OK, 1 is OK, 2 is OK, 3 is right out. But you say, well, this is Perl. I want to be really lax. I want to turn off stricture for this. I want the subroutines, but they shouldn't be strict. So who already knows the answer to how to get strict or lax arity checking of extra stuff? Comma at. Yeah. So that's going to say, and any number of other things. You don't need at equals because 0 is an acceptable number of items for that Slurpee list. Okay? And then you could take that program with the code we just wrote, or sorry, with the code before what we just wrote, and deparse it. And you get what we saw before, right? Unless you have less than or equal to 2 arguments, there's too many arguments, right? We throw an exception. That's our strict checking. But if we throw in that at guy to laxify the checking, to say, well, and whatever else, then when we deparse it, there's not even any arity checking. We just let it go. And what that means is your code runs faster because we're not counting. It turns out counting the items on @ underscore is a little slow. Now we have hopes and plans and dreams to speed that up crazy like in 5.22, but I'm not promising you that. All I'm telling you is this is what happens now. So that's signatures. You can write signatures just like you'd expect. They can have defaults, which are full expressions. You can have slurpy things at the end. You can have throwaway items. You can use prototypes if you gotta. If you use attributes and prototypes, you have to put the attributes first right now. I want the attributes to go later. It just wasn't done in time. The errors you get, they're kind of crappy because they're die. So they come from inside of your subroutine instead of from the caller. And it could be better. And they're a little slower than they have to be. We have plans for fixing that up. So that is my complete overview of subroutine signatures. They are experimental, but they're awesome. They're experimental. You can turn them on with use experimental signatures. Totally turn them on. Like maybe don't commit them to your big work projects, but like in your little one-offs for doing stuff, use them. They're great, and like find if there's any problems, because we want to give them the big thumb up. So how much long do I have left?
You're way over.
I'm way over? That explains the teardown next door. I was getting nervous. Well, that's good because I've only got 4 slides left. So we got postfix dereferencing, awesome, super stoked. Pair slicing, awesome. Subroutine signatures, awesome. Mongolian vowel separation, awesome. Perl 5.20, I almost left this slide up from the last time, which said coming soon. Perl 5.20 is available now, and for a limited time it is free. I like to think about, it's like Perl 5.20 is so busting with cool new features. I like to think of it as being a lot like 5.10, except it's good. This concludes my overview of Perl 5.20. Are there any questions? No one. Yes?
If you use $x equals 0, $y equals 0, comma, at, what do you get when you shift?
OK, so the question was, if you say your subroutine signature is x equals 0, $y equals 0, and then a throwaway list, what do you get when you shift? So the body of your subroutine, this is a good question. The body of your subroutine occurs after all of the looking at the stuff, at the stack, the at underscore. When we assign the variables from your signature, we are copying and not shifting. So once we get into the body, shift at underscore will get the 0th element. So it would get you whatever you passed, if anything, for x. There's been some talk about how to determine which of your variables came from defaults and which were passed in explicitly. This led to kind of a heated discussion on P5P about how this is really important and we really needed it. So let me let you all in on a secret, which is that in every other language that has signatures, you can't find out. Like go do there's probably 1 or 2, but if you do a survey, you will largely find out that if you got it from a default, that's it. You're done. You have a value. Let it go. We will probably add some facility for getting that information because we like jumping off edges. I am hoping that it will be part of a new style caller. So you can say something like caller arrow argc. But that's totally speculation. I got to convince somebody to write it.
Couldn't you just compare $x to $at?
No, because you might have been. So the question is, can you just compare $x to the default, right? No, you can't do that because it might have been passed the default explicitly, or you might have. I mean, maybe. Maybe you could do it in some way, but yes, you can look at the length of at underscore right now. But the other thing is the reason we want to do that is because it turns out if you know the arity of the subroutine, then you can avoid populating at underscore entirely if there's a signature. You just say you can no longer refer to at underscore in the subroutine. You have chosen to use a signature only subroutine, and the subroutine goes a lot faster because it actually takes quite a bit of work to set up at underscore. OK, any other questions? Yes?
So you can do a return as a default value. Will that take any expression?
So you can do a return for your default value. Can it take any expression? The default value itself can be any expression. And that means that the return that you put in there itself can be any expression. And they run variable by variable, I believe, are initialized. So each default can refer to the previous variables, which will have by that point been initialized. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.
Based on a DBH service.
Yeah, you can do a database query. I've done a database query in my default. It was just a proof of concept. You could, yeah. I think you can use a goto. I'm not sure. Okay, we should probably wrap it up because we are way over. Anybody else? Yes, Tim in the back.
I just want to say thank you.
Oh, well. Thank you. I will say a lot of the work that I'm doing is largely making slides and coming to talk about it. The people who do this coding do a crazy amount of work for very little thank you. So if you meet a Perl 5 porter, buy them a drink, pat them on the back, give them a handshake. There's one more question, then we're done.
When do you plan on having some of these features taken out of experimental?
So when do they come out of experimental? I would guess that they will still be experimental in 5.22 and not in 5.24. That's totally a guess. We don't have a policy yet. The whole experimental thing is still developing. I feel really good about it. And I know that I want to rush to put them into production because I'm so excited about them. But that's not the best way to do things. Like, you can use them. Like, I can settle for that. So my guess is we will act like deprecations. Deprecations, we give you 2 years to stop using them. Here, we're going to give you 2 years to stop us from letting you use them. Okay.
There was so much laughter in here, and we heard the other rooms. Everyone's going to think 5.20 is a joke.
Yeah, well, it is funny how many people don't realize that yet. Okay, thank you very much, and see you next year.